Hello everyone, it's Scott, and we're back with Modern Horizons 3 final day of spoilers. We got a lot of interesting cards to dig into, so let's get started with Modern Horizon 3 spoilers. So our first is Ugin's Binding for 2 and a blue mana. You get an instant with Devoid, and you get to return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. And then, whenever you cast a colorless spell with mana value 7 or greater, you may exile Ugin's Binding from your graveyard. When you do, return each non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. So this is a one-way board wipe if you've been able to cast a 7-mana card. So this is Cyclonic Rift on a instant. So the front side of it here, where you're going to cast this Azugin's Binding to remove something, 3 mana is an overcosted, for that. But basically, you're playing 3 mana then later in the game because you're playing cards with mana value 7 or greater. You're going to be able to get that Cyclonic Rift effect, and this is going to be a card I think definitely is going to see some play in Modern. Next, we got Oculate Pride for 1 white mana. You get a cat that's a 1/1 with first strike and lifelink, and it has Ascend. If you control 10 or more permanents, you get this City's Blessing for the rest of the game. And at the beginning of your end step, if you gain life this turn, create a 1/1 white cat creature token. Then, if you have the City's Blessing, for each token you control that enter the battlefield this turn, create a token that's a copy of it. So this is potentially one of the most busted cards from the set, because if you're able to gain life every turn, so if you put this in kind of like a Soul Sisters deck where you're going to be gaining life every time a creature enters the battlefield, then very quickly you're going to get yourself to that 10 creatures that you need, and then you're going to be doubling how many cats are going to enter every time you reach your end step. So I think this potentially, in a go wide strategy, can be a go wide card all on its own. It does die to Orcish Bowmaster, so that's a downside to it. But overall, I think this is one of the better cards from the set. Next, we've got Ashleen Flame Dancer for 2 and 2 red mana. You get a legendary creature that's an elemental shaman. That's a 4/4. You don't lose unspent red mana as steps and phases end, and it has Metalcraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, discard a card, then draw a card. If this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, Ashleen Flame Dancer deals 2 damage to each opponent and to each creature they control. So very powerful ability there. And if it's the third time, you get to add 4 red mana. So you could do this 3 times within a single turn. You're going to get 4 extra mana, and then you're going to be able to keep going. So I think this is definitely a card that has modern playability in the right kind of build, where it's going to be more of a spell slinger style deck, and you're going to be able to take advantage of that Metalcraft ability. And then also, because you don't lose unspent red mana, you can carry that over turn to turn. And the great part of that is then going to give you all the mana you're ever going to need to cast spells throughout the course of the game. Next, we've got Urza's Incubator for 3. You get an artifact. As Urza Incubator enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creature spells of the chosen type cost 2 less to cast. So great spell here. And the nice thing is it's not legendary, so you could have multiple of these on the field at one time. We look at all the Eldrazi we got from the set. Many of them are 5, 6, 7 or more mana. So you could name Eldrazi, and then all of your Eldrazi now cost 2 less to cast. You could do this with angels or demons or any other combination of creatures. So I think this is a card that definitely has modern playability, because it's going to reduce the cost of your creature spells. So any kind of creature style deck, I think, would want a card like this in it. Next, we've got Shilgengar, Sire of Famine for 3 and 2 black mana. You get a legendary creature that's an Elder Demon with flying and is a 6/6. And you can sacrifice another creature to create a blood token. If you sacrifice an angel this way, create a number of blood tokens equal to its toughness instead. And for hybrid white-black mana, 3 of those, you can sacrifice 6 blood tokens to return each creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. These creatures are vampires in addition to their other types. So is this modern playable? Probably not, but this is certainly a good commander card where I think it'll have a lot of success there. And maybe this works in a deck in modern where you're already using creatures that create blood tokens to help you move along that path. But outside of that, I don't think it's cheap enough to warrant being played in modern. Next, we've got Dreamtide Whale for 2 and a blue mana. You get a creature that's a whale that's a 7/5. It has Vanishing 2. This creature enters the battlefield with 2 time counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove a time counter from it. When the last time counter is removed, sacrifice it. So basically, for right there, you're getting it for 1 attack. So probably on the face of it, not very good. But the upside of the card is this. When a player casts their second spell each turn, you get to proliferate. So that means either you cast 2 spells on your turn or your opponent casts 2 spells on their turn, you get another counter on this. So as long as you're able to proliferate, then I think this becomes a very interesting card in modern, low cost, and it's in blue, which we don't typically get cards like this in blue. So I think this has modern playability in the right kind of deck. And I think it'll be interesting to see where deck builders find a place for this in modern. Next, we've got Archway of Innovation. It's a land. Archway of Innovation enters the battlefield tapped unless you control an island, and it taps for blue mana. And you can play 1 blue mana, and the next spell you cast this turn has Improvise. Your artifacts can help cast that spell. Each artifact you tap after you're done activating mana abilities pays for 1 mana. So I really like this card because it now gives you the ability in any kind of artifact deck to turn your artifacts into mana, where it is colorless mana, so you're going to have the mana of the color type you need. But we already are going to be seeing a number of affinity style decks in modern. So I think this just goes right into those decks as a great card to then use the things that are there and get out even larger spells and creatures than you would have been able to do otherwise. Next, we've got Branching Evolution, which is a reprint, and it is for 2 and a green mana. You get an enchantment if 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature you control. Twice that many +1/+1 counters are put on that creature instead. So this is kind of a hardened scales style card. So for 3 mana and hardened scales is 1, it probably doesn't work in modern, but in Commander it's a good reprint. Next, we've got our first lower rarity card of the day, and that's Vexing Bauble. For 1 mana, you get an artifact, and whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. And you can pay 1 and sacrifice Vexing Bauble to draw a card. So this is our answer to the Evoke cards from Modern Horizons 2, and those Living End cards and Crashing Footfalls, all those spells that don't cost anything to cast, plot cards, any number of things that when you actually cast them, they don't cost anything. So I think this is a very, very good card. It might be one of the top cards from the set because it has the potential then to control some of those things that are making it very difficult to play a lot of different strategies in modern. So it'll be interesting to see this. It's one of those cards that definitely I want to get 4 copies of so that I've got them whenever I need them. Next, we've got another land cycle for this set. And these are really interesting lands because they're in the 3 color, Alara shards. And because of that, they all tap for colorless mana, and they can all be sacrificed to go search for a basic land of one of the 3 types that are on the card. And those types are also then used to cycle the card where you can discard it and draw a card. So I think these may have some playability in modern because you can simply sacrifice them and go get a land that's a basic land. And that's a nice ability in modern to be able to do that. Next, we've got Twisted Riddle Keeper. For 8 mana, you get a Eldrazi Sphinx. That's a 5/5, and it has Emerge. For 5, a colorless mana and a blue mana. You may cast the spell by sacrificing a creature and paying the emerge cost reduced by that creature's mana value. So we can reduce that 5 and make that a lower number. And when you cast the spell, tap up to 2 target permanents, put a stun counter on each of them, and it has flying. So very powerful card that I think probably does have a place potentially in an Eldrazi deck where you can sacrifice something, you can then reduce this spell to 3-4 mana at max, and then you get that 5/5 that then has that added ability of coming in, tapping down 2 of your opponent's permanents, and putting that stun counter on them. Next, we have Expel the Unworthy for 1 and a white mana. You get a sorcery with Kicker 2 and a white mana. Choose target creature with mana value 3 or less. If this spell was kicked, instead choose target creature, exile the chosen creature. Then its controller gains life equal to its mana value. So this is really a limited card. We've got better things than this in Modern already. Next, we've got a couple blue spells that we want to talk about, and the first is Bespoke Battle Wagon for 3 and a blue mana. You get a vehicle. That's a 5/6, and you can tap this and get 2 energy out of it. So that to me means it's going to be playable in a energy style deck, and you can pay 2 energy to tap a target creature, or you can pay 3 energy to draw a card, or you can pay 4 mana and Bespoke Battle Wagon becomes an artifact creature until the end of the turn. And it also accrues for 4. So I think this is a good card. I think it will see some modern play if there is a true energy deck out there. And this is one of those ways to get energy turn after turn after turn. Next, we have Depth Defiler for 3 and 2 blue mana. This is an Eldrazi. That's a 3/5 with Devoid. And it has Kicker of 1 colorless mana. When you cast the spell, choose 1. If it was kicked, choose both instead. Return target creature to its owner's hand. Target player draws 2 cards, then discards a card. So very nice abilities on this. 6 mana to get everything. I think that's really good. Being a 3/5, that's a little bit undervalued in terms of the power and toughness, so that might make it a little bit less playable. Next, we've got Emrakul's Messenger for 1 and a blue mana. You get an Eldrazi Fairy Rogue with Devoid. That's a 2/1 with flying. And whenever you draw your second card, each turn create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token with sacrifice this creature to add a colorless mana. So right there, I think there's, in an Eldrazi deck, I think there's playability for this card because if you are able to draw cards as you're continuing to go throughout the game and you've got that as part of your build for the deck, then you're going to be able to continually add extra mana, and that extra mana then is going to help you play those 7, 8, 9, and 10 mana Eldrazi cards that you really want to get to in your deck. Next, we've got the Creation of Avacyn for 1 and 2 black mana. You get a saga. On chapter 1, you get search your library for a card, exile it face down, then shuffle. On chapter 2, turn the exile card face up. If it's a creature card, you lose life equal to its mana value. And then on chapter 3, you may put the exile card onto the battlefield if it's a creature. If you don't put it onto the battlefield, put it into your hand instead. So interesting ability, 3 mana, basically you get to go search up a card that you want, you put it in exile, you pay its mana value in life, and then on the 3rd chapter you get to play it. Now, in Limited this might be okay, but in Modern it's simply too slow to be played there. Next we've got Ethereum Terramander. For a black mana, you get an artifact creature. That's a Salamander Drake. That's a 1/1 with flying. And Ethereum Terramander can block only creatures with flying, and it has Adapt 4 for 6 and a black mana. This ability costs 1 less to cast for each other artifact you control. And when you do, if there are no +1/+1 counters on it, you put 4 +1/+1 counters on it. So, in a couple years ago, we had a blue Terramander that did something very similar to this that saw a lot of play in Standard. So I think this has got not only limited playability, but also playability in Modern if you're in an artifact deck. Next is Lethal Throwdown for a black mana. You get a sorcery. As initial cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature or sacrifice a modified creature. Equipment, aura, you control, or encounters are modifications. Destroy target creature or planeswalker. If the modified creature was sacrificed this way, you get to draw a card. So they give you that advantage of if you got something that's modified that you're going to go ahead and sacrifice, then you get to draw a card for that ability as well. So I think this has got some potential playability in Modern. Definitely a limited card I would want to have in my deck. Next, we've got Quest for the Necropolis. For a black mana, you get an enchantment with landfall. And whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, put a quest counter on Quest for the Necropolis. For 5 and a black mana, you can sacrifice Quest for the Necropolis. If you do, you put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each quest counter on Quest for the Necropolis. Activate only as a sorcery. So I like this card. I think it has some potential playability. Because anything with a landfall ability like this, you play this turn 1, you just keep playing lands, and eventually this becomes 1 black mana to take any creature out of a graveyard and put it on the battlefield on your side, which I think is a pretty powerful ability if you look at it from the long game standpoint. Next, we've got Reiterating Bolt. For 1 and a red mana, you get a sorcery, and Reiterating Bolt deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. And it has Replicate, where you pay 3 energy, and when you cast the spell, copy it for each time you paid its Replicate cost. You may choose new targets for the copy. So if you have a way of generating a lot of energy, this is a great card in that, because it could in some ways end up being a board wipe, because every time you do this, you're going to be able to do 3 more damage to something. And that might allow you, if you've got enough energy just sitting around when you play this, to go ahead and do significant damage to your opponent's board. Any planeswalkers they control you can take out. And because of that, I think it has at least sideboard playability in an energy deck. Next, we've got Skittering Precursor. For 2 and a red mana, you get an Eldrazi Drone. That's a 3/3 with Devoid. It also has Menace. And whenever you sacrifice a non-token permanent, create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token with sacrifices creature and add a colorless mana. So, interesting card for Modern. I don't know if it's going to see a lot of play, but it's certainly something that if we end up seeing a Gruul style Eldrazi deck form, this might be a card that fits into it. Next, we've got Fangs of Kalania. For 1 and a green mana, you get a sorcery where you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, then double the number of +1/+1 counters on each creature that has a +1/+1 counter on it this way. So I really like this ability. It's a great little sorcery where if you're playing in a +1/+1 counter deck, this could go really well in a Hardened Scales deck. As a couple copies of this. And then you also have that Overload ability for 4 and 2 green mana, where you can cast it for its Overload cost. And if you do, change target in its text to each. And I think that in and of itself could even mean more in the late game, where you're going to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that you have, and then you get to double those counters. So potentially a very, very powerful spell in Modern. Next, we've got Lion Umbra. For 2 green mana, you get an enchantment. That's an aura. And it says that you have to enchant modified creature, which means that that creature has to have an equipment, an aura, its controller controls, or counters or modifications. So it has to have one of those 3 things on it to be a target for Lion Umbra. And when you attach it, enchanted creature gets +3/+3 and has vigilance and reach. And we also have Umbra Armor. If enchanted creature would be destroyed, instead remove all damage from it and destroy this aura. So it basically gives you a protection spell. So it basically gives you protection as well once you get it on a creature that's already modified. So I think there is potentially a place for this in Modern. Next, we've got Monstrous Vortex for 3 and a green mana. You get an enchantment, and whenever you cast a creature spell with power 5 or greater, discover X, where X is that spell's mana value. Exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card with that mana value or less, cast it without paying its mana cost, or put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So this potentially, I can see this, in a deck where you are playing a lot of 5 power or greater creatures in your deck. We've got a lot of those in green, and we also have them in other colors as well. Certainly like Ball Lightning, where you can play that. It's 3 mana, and then you can then go find your next one and then find your next one. So I think there is some playability for this in a deck, but is it going to be something that is going to be tier 1? Probably not. Next, we've got Territory Color for 4 and a green mana. You get an Eldrazi with Devoid. It has Reach, and it's a 7/5, and it also has Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, you may reveal it and put it in your hand. If you don't put the card into your hand, you may put it into your graveyard. So really nice ability there. Again, another card that might fit into a Gruul Eldrazi deck. We've had one of those in the past in Modern, so I think with these additional cards, we might be moving closer to getting one of those again in Modern. Next, we've got Planar Genius for a blue and a green mana. You get an instant, and you look at the top 4 cards of your library, so an impulse effect, and you may put a land card from among them onto the battlefield. If you don't, put a card from among them into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And the nice thing about this is you're not drawing the card, so effects that would, punish you like Sheoldred for drawing the card, they don't have an effect here. And this gives you the option of either ramping or taking a card that's going to help you later in the game. So kind of that growth spiral effect potentially on the card. Next, we've got Titan's Vanguard for 3, a red and a green mana. You get an Eldrazi, that's a 5/5 with Devoid. And when you cast this spell, and whenever Titan's Vanguard attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each colorless creature you control. It has Trample. So another really good card that could go into that Gruul style Eldrazi deck. So I think, as we continue to see the cards from Modern Horizons 3, we certainly, it looks like, are going to be able to have a Gruul style Eldrazi deck, and we'll see how competitive it's going to be. Next, we've got Decree of Justice, which is another reprint for X, X2, and 2 white mana. You get a sorcery, and you get to create X for 4 white angel creature tokens with flying. So on the face of it, really bad rate. 6 mana basically to get 1 4/4 creature, 8 mana to get 2, 10 mana to get 3. So really not very good. Now, what is interesting about the card, it might make it Modern playable, is you can cycle it for 2 and a colorless mana. And when you cycle Decree of Justice, you may pay X. If you do, create X 1/1 human soldier creature tokens. And I think if this does see any play, that's where it's going to see play, where you're going to be able to have this late in the game, so there's maybe 1 or 2 of it in your deck, and then you're going to use 5 to 10 mana, and you're going to create a bunch of 1/1 white soldier creature tokens, and then you're just going to be able to hopefully have gone wide enough that you'll be able to defeat your opponent with those additional tokens. All right, next we've got Hydroelectric Specimen for 2 and a blue mana. You've got a weird, that's a 1/4 with flash. And when a Hydroelectric Specimen enters the battlefield, you may change the target of target instant or sorcery spell with a single target to hydroelectric specimen. So you can change. The nice thing about this, if your opponent is using an instant or sorcery to pump up one of their creatures, you flash this in, and now that's going to target your hydroelectric specimen. Or if your opponent is trying to kill your best creature, you can flash this into play and it kills hydroelectric specimen rather than killing your best creature. So I think there's some potential fringe modern playability in that. On the backside, you can play it for a land, and it's Hydroelectric Laboratory. As Hydroelectric Laboratory enters the battlefield, you may pay 3 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped, and it's going to produce blue mana. So I think this has, marginal playability in Modern. Probably a pretty good card in Limited. Last card from the set that we want to talk about is Cursed Wombat. For a black and a green mana, you get a Nightmare Wombat. That's a 2/3. For 2, a black and a green mana, it has Adapt 2. It means you put 2 +1/+1 counters on it if it doesn't have any when you adapt it. And permanents you control have, whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on this permanent, put an additional +1/+1 counter on it. This ability triggers only once each turn. So when you adapt this, you're not only adapting Cursed Wombat, you're adapting every other creature that you have as well by giving them a +1/+1 counter. So I really like this ability. So I think this has some modern playability, and it's in black and green, which normally we don't see a lot of cards like this. So I think that because of that, it might have some modern playability. Certainly a card I'd want to play in Limited if I'm playing black and green. All right, those are our Modern Horizons 3 spoilers. Thanks for staying to the end of the video and viewing our Modern Horizons 3 previews. I appreciate it. And I'll be back later this week with some top 10 lists for mythics, rares, and uncommons. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Again, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout future spoiler seasons. Thanks. I'll see you next time.